Hello everybody, welcome back to the main channel. It's been a bit since I posted like a actual official video on the channel, but I really wanted to make one for Puffin as I've been streaming games of her and playing pretty much exclusively Puffin for the last I don't know, 4 months or whenever Puffin released, I guess even before she released. I think Puffin is super sick and I think the hero is super underexplored. So I wanted to bring a more fleshed out, tested take on the hero and give our thoughts on her. So me and a couple of my testing partners, so Emmanuel and Mark, have been working on Puffin. And she's been putting up pretty good numbers in our recent PQ results. So this exact list I took over the last weekend to two separate PQs, and I ended up top 8ing both. I wasn't able to convert in the top 8, but it's at least performing to a level that I think is very consistent and can take down a lot of the top decks, especially when the meta is something like Gravy, Syndra, Verdance. Those are not the worst matchups for Puffin, and we'll talk about that a bit more in detail, but these are types of decks that you want to see, and you want to find your aggro races. So I like to think that she's more flexible Dio. You have a very aggressive game plan. You can put the pedal to the gas and kind of just beat face in, but you have a lot more decision making. You can block a lot more. You can play for second cycle. Things that Dio doesn't necessarily have the options to do. So I want to get into the list. If you haven't seen a modern Puffin list, I want to talk about the basics first, and then we'll talk about some of the more spicy stuff in this list and why it works in the current meta. So the first things first is the default configuration of the equipment suite. So this is pretty stock standard Puffin stuff. We have the Cogworks rings, we have Poly and the gun, Boundary Heart and Unicycle. Our main hat of choice is Crown of Providence. This is just for fixing your hand, finding the good stuff. A lot of this deck is a little bit draw dependent, so being able to arsenal like a kind of mid card that you hit off the top and cycle it into something better on the next turn is pretty helpful and lets you kind of convert those first couple hands before the engine really starts getting rolling and you can start doing the Puffin thing. So beyond that, let's talk about the reds. So a lot of Puffin's reds are 0 for 4s. We have a huge collection of them now in the list, and it's gonna probably get more considering how OSS has looked to actually push recent Puffin support. I think she's just gonna, by the end of her deck cycle, she's just gonna look like an Aurora deck where all of your reds are 0 for 4s, and you just kind of make them a little bit conditional, and then she kind of does some gross stuff. So we have Backspin, the newest addition to the deck, which looked like it was going to be kind of mediocre, but has opened up some of the grossest playlines I've ever seen in this deck before. It just does some like really silly stuff that was not possible before, and lets you like 2-cog Palantirs being online and like absolutely silly things that should not be live. But we'll talk about that in a second. And then we have the other 0 for 4s. We have Fast and Furious and 0 to 60 as our boost 0 for 4s. These are just your traditional good boost cards. We're running like the good ones, basically, of all the boosts. So we're running FNF 0 to 60, 2 throttles, 3 of the red zippers, and 3 of the yellow zippers. And then the other 0 for 4 that we're running main deck is Soup Up. So again, a lot of these 0 for 4s, they're conditional, but like after the second turn of the game, usually Soup Up's just always on. This is just a 0 for 4 that also happens to block 4. Absolutely crazy. One of the good reasons to actually be playing Puffin is the fact that this card is a 0 for 4 on offense and blocks on hits really well. So, yeah. And then we have another set of 0 for 4s in the sideboard. So this is for our slower matchups, decks that might want to deck us out. Skimmer is just another 0 for 4, but doesn't cause deck damage, so it gets boarded in a lot. That we'll see in the matchup configurations. And then the other reds, we have our crank effects. So we have 2 red boom grenades. I'm a little hesitant on boom grenades still. This card is either like insane, it's a 0 for 4 that draws a card, like insane value, it's like Snatch with Go again, whatever. Whatever you want to call it in this deck. And then sometimes you draw a 2 with a cog and like an attack you can't really play, and they're like unplayable and they're your worst red. So the highs are really high with Boom Grenade, the lows are really low. I could see 2, I could see 1. I really don't want to run 3. Drawing 2 in a hand is really, really bad. And then we have Cog in the Machine. Cog in the Machine might be the best card in the deck. It's probably a toss-up between like Cog in the Machine and like Red Zeppelin being the best cards in Puffin. You can fight me on the Red Zeppelin thing, but that card is actually just heat all the time. But Cog in the Machine just turns on every turn. It makes every hand convert. It's insane. It's just the best thing you can be doing. Action points in Puffin are really gross. They're gross in other mechs, but Puffin really gets to like utilize the extra action point to bait your opponent into overblocking early things on the chain. So you can go like Cog in the Machine, Zeppelin, and then now your Zeppelin doesn't need to hit to get go again, but you can still hit to get an extra cog. And then maybe you follow it up with like a dovetail, and now the dovetail was like obscured by your Zeppelin that they try to block out, and then you can do like some other lines behind that, right? It lets you do absolutely wild things with backspin too. Again, like Cog in the Machine, Zeppelin, backspin is like a crazy line that we couldn't do before that lets you refresh all your cogs from your Zeppelin that you try to punch over. Like if they like de-react your Zeppelin, and then you can go like backspin gun, and then you still punch a bunch of damage through, and they had to like burn a bunch of defenses on the Zeppelin. So just a bunch of super sick stuff gets opened up by Cog in the Machine, and the fact that it can recycle itself is just the cherry on top. Next, we'll talk about the first of probably what people would consider the power cards in the deck, which is Cogworks Dovetail. This card is just a huge role player. It's sometimes just a 1-for-7 go again. Sometimes it like baits blocks, and then you get to like send a Zeppelin behind it. It just does everything that the deck wants to do as a payoff for cogs. It has go again. It lets you do the gun at the end. You can do like Cogworks Dovetail into like Zeppelin, hit, draw, gun, crazy lines where you just push a ton of damage and set arsenals and do everything. The other big payoff for our cogs is Palantir Aeronaut. This is the one most people are familiar with. It's the blow up your stuff one. It's actually a little bit less online than people probably think, and I find is a little bit too clunky beyond Zeppelin. But obviously, like when it's on, and when it hits, it does crazy stuff. But I like to either set it up or wait a bit on using them. Sometimes they just won't line up on the game, especially like into aggro. I would rather see Zeppelin than Aeronaut most of the time, but it gets the job done. And then lastly, the rest of the threats we've already kind of covered, but we have a yellow set of Zeppelins because again, Zeppelin is just that crazy. Beyond that, we have 3 mainboard Skywarden. In the early days of Puffin, people were convinced that, oh, maybe we only sideboard this card, maybe we board 2. It's a little bricky. I strongly disagree with all of that. Skywarden, when it was online, will win you the game on the spot. And because of that, and the fact that it's a yellow pitch, and it like still blocks if you need it to, even if you don't have items out, you should not be going down on copies of this. The card is that crazy when it blocks. It's our only way of generating gold in the entire list. You should just run it. It's that good. The only time we ever side it out is into Kano because it can't do the thing, right? So it is what it is in the Kano matchup, but I would love to see Skywarden after every single one of my Cog in the Machines all the time in every single game. So I just have to put them in and hope that it lines up. Usually you'll get at least a Skywarden for 3 or like a Skywarden for 4 every game. You can always pair it with the arms when you first see your first one to get an extra gold. Then your arms are like 2 block Crown of Dominion, right? But it's good value, right? Like you turn your Skywarden into a 3 block, you turn your arms into 2 block, make it gold, and then you get to do the thing on your turn, crank, get your cogs going, get the engine rolling, and crank through that deck faster. A lot of Puffin is actually cruising through your deck as fast as possible and keeping your cogs alive while you do it. Because that way, the more cards you see, the more consistent the deck is, right? People talk about the inconsistency of mech and the inconsistency of Puffin, but the more cards that you see, the more things that you churn through, the more consistent your deck's gonna be. That's why things like Zeppelin are so important. Lastly, we have the blues. So, our list is currently on 9 copper cogs. People thought I was deranged when I told them that I was going to be running above like 8 when this card got announced, and now like 8 is the minimum, right? I've I've ran lists with 13. That's a little deranged, but you should be on a good chunk of copper cogs. They're the glue of the deck. They let you turn like you go like cog Zeppelin into aggro, and now all of a sudden you're playing a 2 for 6 with on hit go again and on hit draw a card, and the numbers are crazy. So they have to like respect it, and it just turns on the deck. This is your first crank on almost every turn. It's doing the thing. It's letting you recycle it. This just is what it is. I would run more if they blocked, but unfortunately, we do sometimes have to block, which is sad. Then we have Workshop. Workshop is Cog's little brother, makes a Cog, puts a counter on it. So at worst case, this is a 1-cost copper Cog. At best case, when you get a second counter out, it's like 2 copper Cogs, which is sick. It also blocks 3, so it goes in the deck. Then we have a spicy iteration on the new list. This is Blue Skimmer. Blue Skimmer was in really early Puffin lists, and then went out when people realized that you could do better stuff than sending like a 0 for 2 with Go Again with your cogs, because your gun is already using a cog for 2 damage, so this is like spending a card to do that. It's not very good. However, with the introduction of Backspin, we had to make some deck concessions on getting this card online, right? The initial idea was like running the red Skimmer's main board, and then we tried running some like other tap effects, but it turns out that running like a tap effect in your blue base is very strong, because now you can go like, oh, I bricked on my backspin, but I have full tempo, but I found a blue Skimmer. So now you get to go like blue Skimmer, tap, backspin, untap, gun. And that's a 2 card 8. It's 2 card 8 using a blue. It's not like crazy numbers, but when you miss on like Cog and Machine with backspin, or like Dovetail with backspin, or like guaranteeing a Zeppelin into backspin, it's just there as backup when you miss, right? We're trying to make the deck more consistent. Has always been our main goal with Puffin, is to try to make the deck more and more consistent, because when it does the thing, Puffin is so gross. So if you can make it consistent, you can make it win every game, right? Then we have Blue Soup Up. Blue Soup Up is a little bit more dubious than Red Soup Up, in our opinion, because if it's offline, it's like really bad to have like a 2-block blue that's like doesn't do anything and kind of is whatever. Especially in the first couple turns of the game, you really want to get cruising. So we're only on 2, but beyond that, we're on Blue Throttle as like our other blue threat. It's fine in the late game. I don't love casting it, but I don't hate casting it. It's just a 2 for 4 blue. It's fine. Then let's talk about the sideboard. So the sideboard is a little weird lately. First things first, let's talk about the reds, because these are weird sideboard reds. Most people have been off Skimmer or running at mainboard, but we currently have Skimmer in the sideboard, and the reason is that we didn't really need it anymore in the mainboard for the consistency for backspin thrust because of the blue Skimmer, but when you board up, your deck is less consistent, so we get more tappers. So this is more tap effects. But when you tap and then don't have something to untap, you lose value. So we added more untappers. So the deck is more in on the idea of like tapping a cog and untapping it to do like the thing twice. So we have tappers and untappers now in both mainboard and sideboard, so that you can get like this back and forth gameplay where you're doing like tapper first, untapper, and then like another tapper, and then you get like big payoff off your cogs. Now all of a sudden, instead of your cog taps always being 1 every turn, you can make 1 cog worth 2, which is like huge because the cogs are already like really good. If you just like play a cog and shoot your gun twice, your cog is like a 0 for 4. But now if you get to like play a cog, send a Skimmer, then like send a backspin, then send gun, now your cog was worth like, it gave you 2 action points. So your cog was worth 2 action points and 2 damage on just that turn cycle alone, which is just crazy. So cogs can get a little silly when you get to use them multiple times. Then we only have space for 2 bludgers right now. If your meta is more item heavy or more Kano heavy or more gravy heavy, try fitting in more. I recommend dropping the Titan the Screws. And then we're on 2 cog sideboard now. This just we had one cog and like one blue Zeppelin for a bit, but you need two blues in the sideboard for when you board up, but it's just your preference on what you think you want, like item wise. Right now we're on 2 items in the sideboard because we dropped the red backups. A lot of people are going to say that that's kind of crazy, dropping the red backups, that you like need them for Earth, but we found like red backups a little clunky, and usually you want to kind of stack it towards the late game. So we wanted reds that were online from the go and a bit more consistent. So we dropped the red backups for this package, and so we needed a bit more crank in the sideboard, so we're on 2 items. And then lastly, the sideboard items, or the sideboard equipment, I should say. So we have our AB3, usually for Kano, but sometimes also into Verdance, depending on first, second. And then we have Balance. Balance is crazy in this meta. Unfortunately, its pricing is a bit wild right now, but if you have a copy of Balance, slap it in the sideboard of pretty much any deck in the format right now, unfortunately. And it's probably good. You have Gravy still running around, you have KO running around, you have just like incidental hate on random other heroes like Marlin or whoever. So Balance is very good. And then Crown of Dominion. When Puffin was first being worked, Crown of Dominion was the main hat. And then it was like, oh, it's like 50-50. Sometimes you want Crown of Providence for Assassin, but you want Dominion for, your other decks. But it's slowly been relegated to the sideboard, and nowadays we only really bring it into the super slow matchups. So things like Guardian, things like Earth, where we want the consistency of having our Palantirs online, our Dovetails hitting with like a bunch of cogs, right? Where you want the actual pre-setup, and so we run Crown of Dominion so that the first couple turns are a lot smoother before you get a bunch of cogs out and like are maintaining them turn to turn. So that's the main board, and that's the sideboard. We have some maybe boards stuff down here. If you are like, why didn't we put in a misfire dampener, right? We don't have any local Kanos. That's the answer. If you have local Kanos, put this card in your sideboard, right? If you have more item like heroes, put this card in your sideboard. If you have a bunch of Asilios, like maybe Null Time Zone comes in to name Gone in a Flash. Lots of little stuff, right? There's a lot of little tech pieces that you can slot into this sideboard pretty easily that won't really mess with the ratios too bad. Like cutting a Titan, cutting a Skimmer for like some tech sideboard pieces is perfectly fine. It's not going to like ruin the deck building philosophy. So beyond that, I wanted to talk about matchups really fast because a lot of people like don't know how to board Puffin, don't really know the matchups where things are good. So I went ahead and split this list into all the various matchups, and hopefully this can give you at least a starting point. I think they're pretty much comprehensive, but I'm sure there's a matchup here or there that's like not fully covered, or maybe there's like some slight changes. So I'm just going to go through them really quickly. So firstly, the default aggro 60, right? This is the main board we already talked about. We don't have the sideboard pieces in. Beyond that, we have the Assassin board. So into anything that can threaten fatigue, but doesn't usually go into the game like planning to fatigue us, we board 64. So we bring in one of the cogs, and we bring in the skimmers. So we're bringing in some additional red threats, an extra crank, and an extra blue, right? The goal of the sideboard and the way we've configured it is to keep all of your ratios the same every time you board into any configuration. So we have like a 64 card board, and then we have like a 68 card board. So this is the 64 card one. And then when you go to 68, you bring in the Titans and one more cog, right? So you're bringing in more blues, and you're bringing in more crank, and you're bringing in more reds, right? You're keeping the ratios of everything exactly the same. The only thing you lose ratios on is boost cards, right? Because then your deck is less boost heavy, which is actually usually a good thing in these types of matchups, because then you're boosting less and you're like Technical Foundry harding less, which means you're going to get fatigue less. Next up is the Syndrome matchup. We do have Balance in as the headpiece right now. I'm not sold on it, to be fair, but in theory, if you get juiced by like an Ancestral Empowerment on a mass trigger, it helps you recoup a bit of the blowout. Beyond that, it is just the regular aggro 60. I do recommend, if you are going second into Syndra, like they're going first into you, cut 2 cogs and put in 2 red skimmers. It just lowers the chance that you're going to take like 12 damage on turn 1 and be really, really sad. Dash.io, we're again boarding Balance because of Cerebellum Spark stuff, but we're also boarding in the Bludgers. Again, it's an item matchup, so you just take out the Zeppelins, board in the Bludgers, try to steal their Technocore so that we can run the cool card instead of them. Dory is a 64 card board. Florian and Verdance, we are running the 68 card board. Yeah, I feel like I'm saying cardboard instead of cardboard. Anyways, Gravy, I'm running a clean 60 into. Again, Bludgers over the Zeppelins. So cutting the Zeppelins, burning in the Bludgers. In this one, I do board one extra cog instead of the yellow Zeppelin because I really want these Bludgers to be online with like several cogs because it's like pretty important to steal these items. And the no blocks don't hurt as much. Whereas into Dio, the no blocks hurt a lot, right? Guardian 68, Ira 64, Kano. Kano, I board out the Skywardens and the Zeppelin, or like one of the Zeppelins for the extra cogs, just to up the blue count, right? You want extra blues into Kano. We basically, every turn into Kano, you like send a bunch of damage at him, and then you hold a cog. And you look at him and you're like, can you kill me? Through AB3 in my arms, which, again, we don't have the arms, but pretend the arms are here in your imaginary situation where you're fighting a Kano. You send a bunch of damage at them, you hold a cog in your hand, and you say, can you kill me through AB3 Spellwood 2 behind all this damage? And usually they can't, and then you just pass to the next turn, you arsenal your cog, and cog is a great starter for this deck every time, so you're super happy to do that. Beyond that, we have Kasai. I wanted to specifically point out the Kasai matchup because we are on a 64 card board, but we're not boarding Bludgers. And you might be like, well, Kasai makes copper and gold and really wants those. But Bludger does not hit Kasai. That's the problem. I think there's a world where you like try to obfuscate it and like send it at end of chain links, but I find that Bludger is just not very good against her. It doesn't really hit. It ends your turn. It wastes your gun for the turn. I'm not a huge fan. If you've been having success with Bludger into Kasai, please let me know. I can't get it to hit them, but I don't know. Whatever. Katsu is a 60 card. KO, 60 card, but we're on balance. You know, normal stuff. Acilio. People ask how much AB to run into Acilio. 0. Just hit them in the face and hope they don't combo. AB doesn't really matter against Acilio, usually. Sometimes they go like, play a Sigil, Volzar, Mind Warp, and that hurts. Because you would be able to stuff that with AB. But most of the time, it's just kind of a pure aggro race. If they don't find Mind Warps in the first 2 turns, we're probably just going to kill them. They have to basically find combo in like 2 to 3 turns. It happens. You're going to get blown up by an Acilio sometimes. It just is how Wizard functions, unfortunately. Or at least the wizards. And not the green wizards. So you just have to try your best to put them on a super fast clock. Balance is usually live on their turn more than our turn. But it is live on both, so I like to block with Balance fairly early. Because if they do like Sigil pop and then Acilio pop, you want to be able to like balance in response and then like see what you have working with the turn. Another way that they draw to is like CLV with an Acilio trigger, or something like you attack them, they sink below, and then Acilio trigger. Be looking for that type of thing for when to crack your balance. Lastly, we have not lastly. Next we have RKO. RKO is a pretty block-heavy deck. They run like 9 to 12 D-Reacts, and they run like a whole bunch of healing and block cards. So I boarded 68, and I'm a little scared. I did face Dexter on Reinar this weekend, and that matchup was crazy. So I recommend playing really slow and trying to value grind out, otherwise you're probably going to get fatigued. Next we have Verdance, another hard and popular matchup in the format. The way we usually beat Verdance is trying to beat face, and then if you get a large life lead, what you can do if your plan of killing them is like stalling out, or you're struggling, is that if we're going second, we board AB3, You can actually start mid-ranging a bit and maybe threaten decking them. It's a bit of a balancing act between throwing enough damage that they have to block with their attacks and stuff, but then also running them out of threats that way, but also blocking their damage so you don't leak a bunch, right? So it's a bit of a middle ground. It works a bit, but I recommend just sticking to the face plan as much as you can, and then only pivoting to that if you really see an angle. We only run AB3 going second because when they go first and they just go like burn, bear, moon, and you don't have AB, you're going to be really, really sad. Beyond that, we would just like to go aggressive, so this AB3 configuration is only for that. Otherwise, we usually run crown with the boots. Lastly, we have Vincent. It's just the normal stuff with AB1 in the boots. This matchup, you can also threaten fatigue in a similar way, where you do some damage, you take some cards from their hand, you try to threaten a bit of damage. We have enough blues that you can prevent the rune chance, you can block a bit, you can stop the on hits. So try to play this like back and forth game. If they're like sending some crazy stuff, you're not going to outvalue them. You're not going to like out aggro them, especially if they have disruption. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to fight off your local Vincent, that this is not a straight race matchup. You can't just beat them in the face. So that's that. I really love Puffin. I think that this hero is super sick. She has so many crazy things you can do. You get like the multiple game actions and drawing a bunch of cards of like being an aggressive deck, but you still have the ability and the capacity to block a bunch and slow the game down and play like a value grind. So I think she has really like this cool, unique space in the game, and I personally think that she is not only strong now, but has a lot of room to grow and become like an absolute terror if she gets like a new good crank effect that like fits well into the deck and stuff like that. So keep an eye out for Puffin in the future. But that's all I have for you today. I really appreciate you watching. I'm gonna probably post another Verdance video probably pretty soon on my thoughts on how gross she is in the current meta and my expectations for her going into like worlds and that type of thing, because she has a big target on her back and there's a lot of stuff that can uh take advantage of that target. So she's got some interesting stuff coming up. But that's all for now. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.